All right. Well, I think we're live. Hello, good evening. I'm Dan Gibson. I'm coming to you from the historic City Hall in downtown Natchez, Mississippi. And we have an exciting program for you tonight. This is a program dealing with a little known bit of American history that is a connection between Natchez and Washington, D.C. And so here we are today, Tuesday, November 17th, just a few days after Veterans Day. And it makes it a perfect day to tell the story, this story that you're about to hear as we honor our veterans. We will have guests that we will introduce in just a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and mention who they are: Marcia Cole and Deborah Fountain. They live on opposite sides of the country. Marcia on the East Coast in Washington, D.C., and Deborah Fontaine, not Fountain, I'm sorry, Deborah Fontaine on the West Coast in the area of Southern California. Both are individuals who have done a lot of research because of their passion for history and telling the stories. As Deborah has discovered through her own genealogy research, the achievements of everyday people are often overlooked in the telling of history. And so we're going to be talking tonight about everyday people. And Marcia, as an author, uses her history poetry to remind readers that behind statistics are people who lived lives. So we're getting beyond the statistics, beyond the normal stories of history, to very personal stories. The stories that we are going to be sharing tonight have to do with the Emancipation Monument in Washington, D.C., which celebrates the everyday people who made history. We are about to show a video, and then we will introduce our guest. I'm going to take off the glasses so you can actually see me and not just a terrible reflection there. You know, a few weeks ago, a lady in Washington reached out to me. Jill, help me out again. Garrar?
Yes.
Jill Garrar. And Jill is a historian who called to inform us of this amazing link between Natchez and Washington. In Washington, a beautiful monument, the Emancipation Monument, been there since the 1870s. And it was funded by the emancipated citizens of the United States, members not only of the U.S. colored troops, but just ordinary people who a few years earlier had been slaves. These newly emancipated citizens raised a lot of money, over $16,000. And that's a lot of money in 1870s dollars. And do you know that the majority of that money came from right here in Natchez, Mississippi? So let's watch this video that has been provided to us by Marcia and Deborah and Jill. And then we're going to go to the program where we will actually introduce Marcia and Deborah. So watch with me this video. I think you'll find it quite interesting.
The Emancipation Monument, also known as Freedom's Memorial, has stood for 144 years in Lincoln Park in Washington, D.C., just blocks from the U.S. Capitol building. And although over 1,000 miles separate the cities of Natchez and Washington, they share an important connection found in the stories of the Emancipation Monument and its origins. The idea for a memorial to the martyred President Lincoln, paid for entirely by freed men and women, originated with Charlotte Scott, a freed woman of Virginia. Charlotte contributed her first $5 of hard-earned savings to begin a fundraising effort that was quickly taken up by the Western Sanitary Commission of St. Louis, a war relief organization. In Natchez, Brigadier General John W. Davidson, commander of U.S. colored troops stationed in and around Natchez, learned of this effort and shared it with his troops. Their response, which you will hear more about, was immediate. Generous contributions were received from the 6th U.S. Colored Heavy Artillery and the 58th, the 63rd, and the 70th U.S. Colored Infantries, they were joined by freedmen of Natchez. When the monument was erected in Washington, D.C. on April 14, 1876, over 20,000 attended the ceremony. Charlotte Scott was there. Frederick Douglass delivered the oration. President Grant was in attendance and unveiled the monument. And the program published for the event proudly announced that over $12,000 of the $16,000 raised for the monument came from the colored troops under the Natchez, Mississippi Command. In the end, the wishes of Charlotte Scott and the black soldiers were honored. As the plaque on its base declares to this day, this memorial to President Lincoln was paid for with funds contributed solely by emancipated citizens of the United States, declared free by his proclamation January 1st, 1863.
The connection between Natchez and Washington is truly amazing. And up until just a few weeks ago, I did not know about it. It was in the days and months after the Civil War that I believe people began to realize that our assassinated president, Lincoln, had once and for all put an end to the most horrible chapter imaginable in American history, and that is the chapter of slavery. Emancipated citizens, former slaves, began an effort to commemorate what had been done by our nation's 16th president. A beautiful bronze statue is the result of all of this work. And they raised funds across the country to pay for this statue. And it came to our attention just recently that the majority of those funds were raised right here in Natchez. I'm going to introduce two ladies who know a lot more about this than I do. Marcia Cole. Marcia is a playwright, poet, and author of Light in Dark Places, History in Verse. She is a member of Freed, Female Reenactors of Distinction, affiliated with the African American Civil War Museum in Washington, D.C. We also have with us Deborah Fontaine. Deborah's avocation for the past 30 years has been as a genealogist and a family historian. She's a member of two lineage societies, the Daughters of the Union Veterans of the Civil War and the Sons and Daughters of the U.S. Middle Passage. She is the author of the forthcoming book, 9 at Natchez, the remarkable true story of 9 former slaves from who became Civil War soldiers. Ladies, we just welcome you tonight to this important broadcast on this amazing link between Natchez and Washington and the Emancipation Monument, which stands in Lincoln's Circle in Washington, D.C. Marcia, why don't you lead off our discussion by telling us a little about this monument and how you became involved in this important project?
Well, thank you, Mayor, for this opportunity. Once again, my name is Marcia E. Cole, playwright, poet, and author of Light in Dark Places, History in Verse. I live in Washington, D.C., home of the Emancipation Monument. I was researching topics related to slavery, the Underground Railroad, and freedom when I came across a reference to the monument. Since I was in town, I decided to go see it in person. I examined it and noticed a bronze plaque on its base that featured 2 names, Abraham Lincoln and Charlotte Scott. Well, I knew who Abraham Lincoln was, but I never heard of Charlotte Scott. But there were a few lines on that plaque that gave some indications of why her name was included also. I made a mental note of that fact and decided that one day I would make use of that information. That day came when I was introduced to the ladies of Freed. That's F-R-E-E-D, female reenactors of distinction, affiliated with the African American Civil War Museum here in DC along the U Street corridor. These ladies, dressed in period clothes, do presentations where they tell stories of freed or never enslaved women of the Civil War era. Each member was to select someone who made a contribution to our history, but whose story got lost in time, and reclaim it. When I decided to join the group, I knew who I would select: Charlotte Scott. Let me tell you a little bit about Miss Charlotte. Charlotte was born into slavery around 1803 on a Virginia plantation owned by Captain William Scott and his wife Anne. It was also the time that Ohio came into the Union as a free state, and that was important down the line. She was owned by 3 generations of the Scott family. When the Civil War began, Charlotte was in her mid-50s and was owned by Margaret Scott, married to Dr. William Rucker. Dr. Rucker was a known Union sympathizer, and that landed him in jail, and it put his family at risk. So he and Margaret decided she should take their 4 sons and household slaves to Marietta, Ohio for safety. But the Federal Army wouldn't transport them unless Margaret freed her household slaves first. That's how Charlotte came to be free and in Ohio. With the help of some friends, Dr. Rucker got out of jail and joined them there in Ohio. On the morning after President Lincoln was assassinated, Charlotte and the Ruckers were at home in Marietta, Ohio, and they learned the awful, awful news. Everyone was stunned into silence. Then Charlotte spoke up. She said, "Colored people have lost their best friend on earth. They should raise a monument to his memory." Now, the Emancipation Proclamation allowed her to earn fair wages and to keep what she earned. So after she made that statement, she went and retrieved $5 of her hard-earned money and asked the Ruckers to help her get the money to someone honest who could help get the word out and collect money from former slaves and Black soldiers. Dr. Rucker suggested a local, well-respected reverend who might be a good person to help with a fundraising effort. His name was Reverend Battelle. Charlotte called upon him personally, and he cheerfully accepted her contribution and agreed to help with her noble idea. Reverend Battelle published a notice in their local newspaper describing Charlotte's dream of a monument to the martyred president. He also reached out to a Union general, Brigadier General T.C. Smith, who shared Charlotte's idea and her photograph with James Yateman in St. Louis. Yateman led the Western Sanitary Commission, a well-known war relief organization that also worked to improve the welfare of freed men and women. Deborah Fontaine will tell you more about the Western Sanitary Commission and how word of Charlotte Scott's idea made its way to the U.S. colored troops of Natchez. But before I turn it over to Deborah, I want it to be known Miss Charlotte had a reputation for industry, intelligence, and moral integrity that was appreciated by all who knew her, colored and white. I'm sure these qualities inspired others to readily support her dream. Her story demonstrates the power of one to make a difference in history and make impact. Now I turn the discussion over to Deborah Fontaine.
Thanks, Marcia. Wow, it was fantastic to learn so much about Miss Charlotte Scott. What an amazing woman. Now, we'll turn our attention to Natchez, Mississippi. And in acknowledgement and recognition of veterans, let's take a couple of moments to review some of the historic and relevant events of the Civil War years at large and there in Natchez, which preceded President Lincoln's assassination. If you're like me, sometimes a brief refresher is helpful for context, especially when it involves history events of long ago. So, the Civil War began on April 12, 1861, when the Confederate troops fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. And then on January 1st, 1863, a year and a half later, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which was a declaration that those who were enslaved in the states which had seceded from the Union were free. Additionally, the proclamation also announced the acceptance of Black men into the Union Army and Navy. The Union began to actively recruit and enlist Blacks, and by the end of the war, roughly 200,000 Union Black soldiers and sailors had fought during the Civil War for freedom. And of that number, more than 17,000 were from the state of Mississippi. On July 4th, 1863, with the fall of Vicksburg, the Union gained control of the Mississippi River, and that was a major turning point for the Union forces. By the next month, August 1863, Union troops controlled Natchez and organized the 58th Regiment of the U.S. Colored Infantry there. In Natchez, more U.S. colored troop regiments were organized in the ensuing months. The units organized were the 63rd U.S. Colored Infantry Regiment in March 1864. Soon to follow the next month, which was April 1864, was the 70th and 71st Colored Infantry Regiments, as well as the 6th Colored Heavy Artillery Regiment. The Civil War raged on across the country. Finally, 1 year later, on April 9th, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered his Confederate troops to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. Sadly, just 5 days later, on April 14, 1865, John Wilkes Booth assassinated President Lincoln inside Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. And as has been shared, it was the following day when Charlotte Scott, upon hearing of President Lincoln's death and inspired by her great admiration of him, it was in that moment which she came up with the idea that a monument should be erected in honor of Lincoln, to which she gave the first $5 toward that noble cause. Charlotte's proposal was deeply heartfelt, very generous in nature, and with immediacy of intent and purpose. Now, we can pick up the story where we left it with James Yeatman of the Western Sanitary Commission and the newspaper publication of Charlotte's originating donation and the proposal to raise the funds solely from the contributions of freedmen. Now, prior to the publication, General T.C.H. Smith was one of the men who had written to Yeatman regarding Charlotte's proposal. In the Joseph T. Wilson's book, The Black Phalanx, we learn how the contribution process at large began. Yeatman said, In compliance with General Smith's suggestion, I published his letter with a card stating that any desiring to contribute to a fund for such a purpose, that the Western Sanitary Commission would receive the same and see that it was judiciously appropriated as intended. In response to his communication, liberal contributions were received from colored soldiers under the command of General J. W. Davidson, headquartered at Natchez, Mississippi. Now, there are wonderful letters from the colonels of the Natchez U.S. Colored Troop regiments, which provide information about the generous donations of those soldiers. Some of the excerpts of the letters from Natchez commanding officers which were sent to accompany the funds to James Yeatman at the Western Sanitary Commission are as follows. I will share them with you so that you can really understand the depth of such an amazing contribution. On May 19th, 1865, regarding the 6th U.S. Colored Heavy Artillery, dear sir, I hereby transmit to you to be appropriated to the monument to be erected to the late President Lincoln the sum of $4,292, the gift from the soldiers and freedmen of this regiment. Allow me to say that I feel proud of my regiment for their liberal contributions in honor of our lamented chief. Please acknowledge receipt. Very respectfully, your obedient servant, John P. Coleman, Lieutenant Colonel, commanding 6th U.S. Colored Heavy Artillery. 2 days later, Brevet General J.W. Davidson, he followed up and wrote to James Yeatman and said, upon seeing your suggestion in the Democrat, I wrote to my colonels of colored troops, and they are responding most notably to the call. The 6th United States Heavy Artillery has sent some $4,700. The money here spoken of has been turned over to Major W.C. Lupton, Paymaster, USA, for you. Please acknowledge receipt through the Missouri Democrat. The idea is that the monument shall be raised to Mr. Lincoln's memory at the national capital exclusively by the race he has set free. Very truly yours, J.W. Davidson, Brevet Major General. 9 days later, on May 30th, 1865, from Colonel W.C. Earls to Brevet Major General J.W. Davidson. General, I have the honor to enclose the sum of $2,949.50 as the amount collected under your suggestion for the purpose of erecting a monument to the memory of President Lincoln. Every dollar of this money has been subscribed by the Black enlisted men of my regiment, which was only an aggregate of 683 men. Much more might have been raised, but I cautioned the officers to check the noble generosity of my men rather than stimulate it. Allow me to add that the soldiers expect that the monument is to be built by Black people's money exclusively. They feel deeply the debt of gratitude they owe is large, and anything they can do to keep his memory green will be done cheerfully and promptly. If there is a monument built proportionate to the veneration with which the Black people hold his memory, then its summit will be among the clouds, the first to catch the gleam and herald the approach of coming day, even as President Lincoln himself first proclaimed the first gleam as well as glorious light of universal freedom. I am, General, most respectfully, your obedient servant, W.C. Earls, Colonel, 70th United States Colored Infantry. Now, in that letter from Colonel Earls, he pointed out the small number of men who contributed such a large amount because he understood the contributions averaged between 1/3 to 1/2 of their monthly salary. I'm sure most would agree that you'd be hard pressed to find many people who would so eagerly donate such a large portion of their earnings for a cause. And lastly, a couple weeks later, on June 15th, 1865, from W.C. Lupton, paymaster, to James Yeatman, President, Western Sanitary Commission. Sir, the colored soldiers of this district, Brevet Major General Davidson commanding, feeling the great obligations they are under to our late President, Mr. Lincoln, and desiring to perpetuate his memory, have contributed to the erection of a monument at the National Capitol as follows. The 70th, $2,949.50. The 63rd, Companies A, C, and E, $263. The freedmen of Natchez, $312.38. Now this, added to Major John P. Coleman of the 6th U.S. Colored Heavy Artillery, who has already sent you nearly $5,000 for the same fund, and the 57th United States Colored Infantry desire me at the next payday to collect $1 per man, which will swell the amount to nearly $10,000. This is a large contribution from not quite 1,700 men, and it could have been made larger. Many of the men donating over half their pay, and in some instances, the whole of it. But it was thought best to limit them. Will you please publish this, that the colored soldiers and their friends may know that their money has gone forward, and send me a copy of the paper. I am, sir, with regard, W.C. Lupton, Paymaster, United States Navy. These letter excerpts, which detail the soldiers' donations, reveal Charlotte's proposal elicited heartfelt, generous, and prompt responses from them. It should be noted the initial donations and letters were sent in May, which was just a few weeks after the article, and the letter from W.C. Lupton followed in a matter of mere weeks, dated June 15th. The Natchez soldiers and freedmen's total of $12,150 was subsequently increased to $16,242. Now, the fundraising goal had been $50,000. However, the final tally of the funds donated in all totaled $18,000. That being said, it is clear that by and large, the vast majority of those funds were the funds donated by the Natchez U.S. colored troops. The funds were raised. That's great. However, progress regarding the creation of the monument slowed during the era of Reconstruction. Over a decade passed, and the Emancipation Monument, also known as the Freedmen's Memorial or Emancipation Group, was finally erected and dedicated on April 14, 1876, which marked the 11th anniversary of President Lincoln's assassination. Congress declared that day a holiday in the District of Columbia. This allowed all federal and local government offices, as well as many businesses, to close so workers could attend the celebration. Frederick Douglass was the keynote speaker, and President Ulysses S. Grant and Charlotte Scott were also in attendance. Other attendees included Many high-ranking individuals, such as members of President Grant's cabinet, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, justices of the Supreme Court, the Japanese minister, the Marine Corps band, as well as thousands of ordinary citizens alike. Truly, the erection of the Emancipation Monument was an amazing accomplishment, which even preceded the Lincoln Memorial by 46 years. Wow. The monument stands today at our nation's capital because of Charlotte Scott's proposal and generous seed fund donation, and because of the generosity of those U.S. colored troops, Natchez soldiers, whose sacrificial donations, in large part, funded it. Thank you, and our hats off to Natchez.
You know, we are just so excited to have you ladies here with us and sharing this important milestone of history. The connection between Natchez, our U.S. colored troops, and this monument is really something to celebrate. You know, here we are in a culture, time in our country's history where, you know, so many people rush to judgment. And I know that over the course of the summer, Marcia, you shared with me that there were some who obviously didn't understand the history of this memorial and wanted it to be removed. Marcia, could you share with us a little of that and how that prompted you to get into action and to actually reach out to us?
Well, a friend of mine who's a professor at Howard University got wind of attempts to take the monument down. And so she's offered to film me talking about why the monument was important for her class. And while I was down there, people started to inquire why I was dressed in my period clothes, and I explained to them. And it wasn't long after that a rally was proposed at the site of the monument, and people wanted to take it down. Well, I went down with some of my freed members to do a teach-in, and I managed to get, it was kind of a boisterous crowd, and I managed to get the microphone, the megaphone, to talk to them, to tell them that there was a history that they did not know, and not to take it down. History had placed it there and it should remain there. Well, after I had a chance to have my piece with them, people approached me afterwards and said, "We agree with you. We want to help you to tell this story." And that's how I met Jill, whom you mentioned, and others who approached me with different aspects of why the monument should be preserved. The relatives of Arch Alexander. We have a team member who speaks to Abraham Lincoln freeing the first slave he freed before the Emancipation Proclamation. We have another team member who talked about Frederick Douglass and his feelings about the monument. And we formed a team to create a video, education video, that we have on our website, our new website, also thanks to Jill. I'd like to share that website with you and invite people to go watch it and see the full story of the hidden history behind the monument. If they will please go to Emancipation Monument, that's one word, emancipationmonument.org, they will see the video and more information about the people involved in its creation to make sure it was there. And that's the elevator minute about how that came about. But I was stunned at people who approached me that I did not know, but wanted to support the idea of keeping the monument there because it's been there for over 140 years. And I was afraid that if it was removed, It would also remove evidence of Miss Shaw's legacy and all those who contributed to it. And I didn't want her legacy to be lost again. So that was why I fought for her legacy and all those who contributed.
Marcia, I find it really poetic, and you are a historian who tells history through poetry. I find it very that here you are, a woman of color, portraying in historic reenactments this wonderful woman of the past, Miss Charlotte Scott, and that you were the one who, with great bravery, took on this boisterous crowd, got that microphone, and set the record straight. And don't you know that Ms. Scott would be proud of you, and
Well,
that you should, in taking on that crowd and setting the record straight. I see Deborah smiling. Deborah, that is poetic, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Indeed, it is. And we appreciate so much Marcia's willingness to speak up.
well, you know, people use the word bravery, and I didn't think of the word, I didn't think of myself as being brave. I just seized the moment and did what I felt I needed to do. And others call me brave, but it's the leader for our freed group, Pat Tyson, says she thinks our people choose us. We think we're choosing them, but our people choose us. And I guess had I not taken up Miss Charlotte, there might have been a dissenting voice as to why it should remain. So I'm very thankful to be used by the ancestors in that way.
And I'm so thankful, Marcia, because in preserving that monument, you preserved a very important part of American history. And what a shame it would be to erase the contributions, not only of Miss Scott, who came up with this idea literally just weeks after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. But to the next day, Deborah, but it would also have erased the contributions of so many U.S. colored troops who literally gave half their paycheck to make sure that this monument became reality. And could you tell us again, Deborah, how many years this monument preceded the Lincoln Memorial? By how many years?
46 years. This monument was erected in 1876, which was actually our nation's centennial, you'll recall, year. So it was erected in 1876. The Lincoln Memorial was not erected until 1922. So for that entire time period, when people visited Washington, D.C., the Emancipation Monument was a key tourist attraction. People wanted to see the monument. And I am a descendant, and I have multiple ancestral family members who were a part of one of the regiments of soldiers there in Natchez, who were a part of contributing to the fund for the monument. And so as a descendant, I feel very strongly as well about the monument. Those soldiers, as Charlotte, they believed that it was important that monument would be erected, and they gave so generously with the understanding that it would be from the funds from the Black community alone, and that it would be at our nation's capital. So it would be a disservice to do something to change what they worked so hard to ensure would be a reality.
Wouldn't it? And so for 46 years, this was the only monument in Washington to the legacy of Abraham Lincoln. and the emancipation of the American slaves. And you are writing a book, Nine Out of Natchez. Tell us briefly, Deborah, you had 9 ancestors who were members and freely enlisted in the U.S. colored troops, and 8 of them in a single day.
Yes.
8 of them enlisted tell us about that.
Yes. Well, thank you for asking. Yes. 8 of them enlisted on July 5th, 1864. So that was, several months before Lincoln was assassinated. But I am very proud to say that my 3rd great grandmother, Mary, she was listed as being born on Ocean, and had parents who were both born in Africa. She had, from her family, 3 sons, 1 son-in-law, 4 grandsons, and 1 grandson-in-law, all to enlist in Natchez and serve in the colored troops. And we are very proud of that fact. And her oldest son is who I descend from, and that would be Claiborne Thompson.
Wow. And they all contributed, very likely, they contributed that
Yes.
money.
Yes.
So to do a quick wrap up, people who may not have heard the entire program, and I see, by the way, Alderwoman Valencia Hall making some really great comments here, and this is a historic day just to celebrate this connection between Natchez and this amazing monument. But I also see Frances Wallace, who is with our Natchez African American Museum, the NAPAC, and she is wanting to make sure that we can get information for the museum here in Natchez. So we want to make sure that happens. I would like to see, in fact, some exhibit created for display, possibly at our visitor center, that would tell this compelling story. Some of the controversy about the statue that prompted Marcia to become the rescuer, it had to do with the design of the statue. I don't think people really understand what the statue depicts. Is a freed slave bowing in great appreciation to President Lincoln for his emancipation. Marcia, could you tell us more about the design of this monument?
Sure, but first I want to show you the picture of the woman in question, Charlotte Scott. Can you see that picture? This is Miss Charlotte.
There she is.
And I want people to see what she looks like, and that's her for her formal portrait as a free woman. Mary, you say that the figure is kneeling, but actually he is rising. And that was part of my argument, is that people, if you look at it closely, he's not on 2 knees kneeling. 1 knee is down and 1 knee is up, like a sprinter getting ready to get up and run. He's going for it. And he's looking upward with a face of expectation, looking forward to a life of freedom. So that's how I see it. And, depending on how you photograph that arrangement, sometimes it can look like the Lincoln is patting his head, or it depends on how you photograph it as to what you see. But if you actually walk around it and get close to it, you see that Lincoln, who was himself a very tall man, of course it's going to be much taller than someone who's rising. So that affects the optics as well. But that figure is rising and going for freedom. His shackles are broken, and you do not see a scored back, but you see someone vigorous and ready to take on a life of freedom.
Yes, and I would like to add, yes, it was not it was a depiction, as Marcia has stated, of him in the act of rising. And the sculptor intentionally shows the broken shackles, and that represents his own agency in his freedom. That is what that represents, the broken shackles on his hands, that he had worked to free himself. He had agency in his freedom as well.
Wow. Wow. I am so glad I asked the question. This is why programs like this are so important, because we go off in one direction with half truth or even no truth. And it's historians like the two of you ladies who are so valuable to our country. It's important that we don't forget our history. It's important that we don't misinterpret it or rewrite it, because truly we learn from our history. And it also can be said, as often quoted through time, the ancient philosopher said, those who forget the lessons of history are doomed to repeat it. Speaking of history, I see a local historian and someone I've known since college, Jeff Mansell, making a statement. The Natchez National Historic Park produced a Natchez History Minute during the tricentennial celebration in 2016 about the monument and the contributions by the U.S. colored troops. It was narrated by Betty Cade, who is a beloved minister in our community, and can be viewed on the park's Facebook page and YouTube channel. Thank you, Jeff. And we'll make sure we make that video available as well. I think this is a good time also for me to point out something that you ladies may not know. We're learning so much from you tonight. Let me tell you something that we're excited about in addition to this, and it's perfect timing. Just last week, the Department of Interior delivered to the Congress their budget request for projects for the National Park System for the fiscal year 2021. And on that list, many have worked in our community for years to make this happen. And we have been working over the last month or two with some lobbyists, actually, that we have hired to help in this. And on that list now is a funding request for our Forks of the Road project here in Natchez. And we are hopeful we have the support of our entire delegation from Mississippi, Republican and Democrat, black and white, to support us in this historic step forward. From 1833 to 1863, the Forks of the Road in Natchez was the second largest slave market in the Deep South, second only to New Orleans. There were days when, in the height of growing season or harvest season, as many as 500 enslaved Africans were sold right there in a single day, right there at that slave market. And a gentleman in our community for many years, Sir Boxley, has fought to have that site properly commemorated. And our park service and our director of that park service, Kathleen Bond, has been working to make that happen. And so the city of Natchez has already deeded 9 parcels of land to the Park Service that the city already owned. And now with this appropriation request, once it goes through the Congress, and we believe it will, then we will be able to acquire the rest of the land needed to create the Forks of the Road Slave Market District, part of the Natchez National Historical Park. And it will be the only such site in the entire park system in the United States of America dedicated to the proper telling of this important chapter of our past.
Well, that's Fantastic. I was aware, and I want to take a moment to really extend words of thanks to the Natchez National Park Service. Uh, I can't tell you enough what a fantastic job the Park Service does there. My hat's off to Jeff and Kathleen and all of the others who do such a great job at serving the public. And this is great news. And you know, for those who aren't aware, there is the connection between the forks in the road and Fort McPherson from the Civil War, in that the 58th Regiment received the instructions from their commanding officers, and the wood of the slave pens were torn down by the soldiers of the 58th, and that was used in constructing the fortification for Fort McPherson in the Civil War.
Wow.
So it's an amazing story. The story just continues.
Wow. Well, you know, what's exciting about our story is here we are. Natchez just started. We are now into our 4th century as the oldest city on the Mississippi River, perched on the highest bluff, and truly a city of love, a city of unity, a city of hope. And this program tonight inspires me, Marcia, Deborah, because it just shows that what was so important so many years ago is now being celebrated. And we can't wait to see an exhibit created here in Natchez that will properly tell the story of the Emancipation Monument and how it was funded by the vast majority of U.S. colored troops right here in Natchez. Tell us those numbers again. The total budget, I thought it was $16,000. Turns out it was actually $18,000 raised to construct this monument.
Total, correct. Originally, the budget or the goal, they were trying to reach $50,000, but they were not able to reach that goal. So in total, all funds raised totaled $18,000. And from Natchez, as you know, originally they had contributed $12,150.
So Natchez, it can be said that Natchez paid for this monument.
By and large, for the most part. And that's why this is so important, because unfortunately, this part of the story has not been told. There's no recognition of that on the monument itself. There's on the plaquage. You'd be hard pressed to find that distinction regarding exactly where the funds came from. It generally will just say freed formerly enslaved people or freed slaves. And so we are working as a descendant. This is very important to me, and I am hoping that some of the other residents of Natchez, maybe some will discover that they are also descendants of these colored troop soldiers. And I'm hopeful that we can have a descendants group that can grow, and that we can get together and really celebrate the contributions of our ancestors who served in the colored troops there.
Now,
Well,
can I interject
Marcia?
that here in DC, we're working on trying to get signage for that monument, so that it's not just standing there in today's day, but it has signage that makes it understood what was put into it, and that's where we can also put the contributions of the 70th and the colored troops. So we're working on that to make it more up to date.
And we'll be happy to help you. I want to say this: as soon as conditions improve and you're able to travel, we want to have you ladies here in Natchez to have a program in person discussing more about this amazing story. And also, we want to commit now to helping those in our community who are interested in doing this to trace their roots, make their connections, and also to create an amazing exhibit that can be on display permanently here in Natchez, telling this important story.
That would be wonderful.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So glad to hear, and we're always available. And I too look forward. I haven't been able to travel to Natchez this year. I usually come at least once or twice a year. And so, but with the situation that we're in, I was prevented for coming this year.
Well, we'll make sure you have a place to stay when you make your return visit. Deborah, you too, Marcia. We're out of time. I have a radio show that starts now, and I'd have to go to it. God bless you. I feel like I have two new best friends.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you
Bye.
so much. God bless.
Take care. Take care.